The following program is presented by TCI Cablevision, Channel 27.
North Attleborough has always been a town with a lot of pride, and one of the things the townspeople are most proud of is their school system. When it became apparent in the late 1980s that the school enrollment was climbing, the town realized something had to be done to accommodate the student space needs. It was time once again for North Attleborough to work together to solve a difficult problem. This is the story of the Martin Elementary School addition. In February 1989, the Planning Committee issued a recommendation. Citing reasons such as the town's rising student population, the committee urged the construction of a new school. Thus, the history of the Martin Elementary School addition began.
Back in the 1980s, the school committee and school administration were very aware that the schools would eventually have a space problem. They hired a space consultant, and he did a whole survey of the school system, and he came back and presented statistics on how many students he thought that the schools would have to accommodate through the 1990s. So it clearly showed that they were going to run out of space. So the committee put together a school planning committee. It was a group of citizens who looked at the space issue, met with Bill Kelly, who was the superintendent at the time, and came back with a recommendation to the school committee that the best way to go eventually would be a new school rather than additions. They thought that the school system would get the most for its money out of a new school. They didn't specify whether it should be an elementary school or a middle school, but that they felt that a new building would be the best way to go.
When I first came into North Attleborough in 1991, there had been a couple of years of study of the need for space in the school system, and we looked at the possibility of a new middle school. That politically was not going to fly, and so therefore the agenda became adding on to the 3 elementary schools. I think that people did realize that there was a growing population, and that the town had to respond somehow, and in weighing that somehow with the financial realities of North Attleborough, the addition concept came into being, and we moved in that direction.
In a word, I would say crowded. Every nook and cranny in the building was utilized. Storerooms were cut in half to be used as instructional areas. A room was added in the kitchen to be used for testing and instrumental music. Everywhere you looked and went, there seemed to be a child working with an adult or parent. There really weren't areas that were adequate for the core instruction of music, instrumental music, art, APE instruction, adaptive phys ed, speech and language therapy. These were kinds of areas that were in closets, in reconstructed storerooms that really weren't adequate facilities. So in a word, we gained space with the new addition.
Chapter 766 was passed in the early 70s, which required a certain type of education for children with special needs. The population in North Attleborough, as it became more heterogeneous, as it changed, and you had folks coming in who may have learning issues, those children needed to be provided with programs. You needed classrooms to meet their needs, and that meant substantially separate classrooms for special ed kids, resource rooms. It meant also early childhood classrooms, given state mandates. You had the advent of the computer into instruction, much more emphasis on libraries. So all this new programming that was coming into particularly the elementary schools, and even at the junior high level, was taking up classroom space that would have had regular classrooms in the past. The second variable here is that there was a definite philosophical move to decrease class sizes. Back in the late 60s, 50s, 60s, and even early 70s, people were still in a mode that we were educating children for an assembly line society, and that everyone could take the same lessons and march through them. But I think with now that we're looking at a much different society, that we're training people, educating people for to work in groups, to ask questions, to discuss issues, to problem solve, that's a different type of education. It's not a rote education. It's not as easy. Everyone is not on the same page. We're looking at intelligence as much more than just computing and reading. There are different forms of intelligences that we're trying to respond to in a class setting, develop curriculum and instruction that meets a variety of intelligence, learning styles, pupils' needs. That type of education cannot be done in a classroom with 30 to 35 kids, particularly in, say, grades K to 3. I'm definitely feeling that you have to have small class sizes with younger children to give them the individual attention, the support that they need. Children now in these times, often two parents working, sometimes just one parent homes. They need much more individual attention, much more connection with an adult than perhaps in times past when there might have been a parent in the household. So I think that all those variables have produced a change that required a whole different configuration for schools that don't allow us to go back to what was straight rows of 30 to 40 kids in a classroom. It's an entirely different ballgame.
With the need for extra space being clearly defined, it was time to look at existing buildings in town and decide what the plan of attack would be to increase space. Two of the proposals committee members faced were whether to expand the neighborhood elementary schools or build a new middle school. Each of these original proposals would require an override vote by the town residents of Proposition 2.5.
Well, the school building committee was established by vote of town meeting, and the type of membership of the school building committee was included in the town meeting vote. The actual members were appointed by the town moderator, but there was the people who ended up serving were mostly people who had been involved in town government before. You had an attorney, someone who was involved in construction. You had a former member of the Public Works Board. You had a teacher. I think we had a school committee representative. So you had a mix of people, someone from the planning board. There was a mix of people there who were versed in various aspects of a building project. So it formed a mix of opinions, in effect. Now, when they came up with their proposal for additions, there was also a concern that because town meeting had voted down a middle school, there was a concern that maybe the community wouldn't support a middle school and that perhaps the emphasis should be on additions. There was also a concern about protecting the concept of neighborhood schools, of keeping sixth grades in the elementary buildings, whereas building a middle school would put the sixth grades in with the seventh and eighth graders. There was a mix of opinion in town as to which method was better. The educators and the school committee preferred the middle school approach because that is the trend in education. But there were some members of the building committee who believed in the neighborhood schools and wanted to keep the sixth grades in the elementary buildings. So the additions would have accomplished that. So there were many issues that were considered in coming up with the proposal for the additions.
Originally, there was a feeling to add on to the AMVET the Falls and the Martin. I think that came from the individuals who were on the building committee, from their sense of studying all the schools. They went and visited all the schools and felt that those were the ones that should be targeted first. And at the same time, in that first proposal, I think there was a renovation to the junior high. So I think it was their own study. I think from their experiences in the town, I think that they probably had particular feelings that that every part of the town, as much as possible, should have an addition. Then, when the 3-school thing dwindled to 2, and the 2 failed, and it came to what would be financially feasible, it came to the Martin. As I talked about earlier, the Martin was the most feasible, given its location, given the footprint and the costs. And so I think it was basically a decision-making process that moved along from a larger plan to one that could be sold politically to town meeting. And I mean, that's, to me, is the name of the game in North Attleborough, as to what can be sold politically, given some very strong a very fiscally conservative community.
There was a perception in town that the schools really didn't need to grow. And if you go back into the early 70s, late 60s, when the high school was originally built, that was a big battle. So I don't think anybody ever really got out of that. So it was now, if you really want to build a school, you've got to, absolutely, positively prove to us that you need that space. And then you got to come in with the funding and a price that we're going to be able to handle. So I think a lot of it was just education. The town has grown since that point. Looking at all the benefits that we could get just from the Martin addition to help us and buy us some time, so we could finish what else we're going to do, or where else all these kids are going to come from. That's what we need to do.
We determined it wouldn't necessarily be less costly. However, the committee back in that time period felt that when we studied the issue, we wanted to stick with the concept of neighborhood schools as much as possible. At that time, when we looked at the growth projections, we believed that additions to the AMVET, Falls, and Martin schools would be the appropriate way to go. Also, we thought that the junior high would need some attention. We understood that, and that we wanted to take a second look at the junior high after those additions were online. And part of that proposal was some, I think, $1 to $2 million of renovation work to the junior high as a stopgap measure. And then we knew we would need at least an addition, a substantial addition to the junior high at some period of time, which we're now approaching. The reason we decided to renovate and add something to add in addition to Martin was simply that Martin was designed for an addition. The other schools were not designed with the specific intent to add on. However, Martin was, and based on those plans, I think it was a unanimous decision of the committee that if any addition was to be built on any of the elementary schools, Martin would be the first because of its initial design and because of its relatively young age, built in early 1960s versus the other schools, which are probably predate all of us.
After 2 override rejections, it was abundantly clear that the town was not going to fund a project that called for an override of Proposition 2.5. Being faced with this dilemma, the school building committee voted unanimously to ask the town to fund an addition to the Martin Elementary School, this time without an override. In March of 1994, RTM approved $6 million for the project.
I believe that in sitting on the town meeting sessions, it was pretty obvious that the RTM members had a high regard for the people who were on the school building committee. the initial study committee and then subsequently the building committee. When they made their proposal at town meeting, I think the RTM members had a lot of faith in what the building committee had done and had proposed. So when the building committee set the additions as in a priority order and said that the Martin project would be the best one to do first, when it seemed as though only one project could be approved, that was the project that was proposed by the school committee because they felt it was the most feasible project. Now, there was a feeling of concern that what if this is the only addition that the town ever does? That means one end of town will have a renovated school, a much larger school, a much more modern school, whereas the other end of town won't have this advantage. So there was a lot of concern about that. And even some of the parents who supported the Martin School addition were very concerned about the size of that school, that this would go from an elementary school that housed 300 and some odd students to an elementary school that housed 725 students. They thought that would be a huge school, and that might not be such a good idea to have such a large facility at the elementary level. But I think there was just so much concern for the pressing need for more classrooms that they felt this is the best project to go with, let's do it, and town meeting agreed.
It was the school, the most recently built elementary school in North Attleborough, and when they built it, there was a footprint in the plans to put an addition onto it. So therefore, as the building committee was looking at schools to add to, the Martin was an obvious choice. One, because it was of the footprint that was there in the plans. There was land to build upon, which of course is a concern, and it had an excellent reputation, and so for all those reasons it was an obvious choice if you were going to go to building an addition onto a school.
Well, I think, as I said earlier, we were trying to preserve the concept of neighborhood schools. We knew that in all likelihood an override would be necessary, and we were trying to appeal to the broadest base of town voters so that instead of one area of town getting a newer school versus a new school or an addition, it would appeal to the broad spectrum of voters. Obviously that didn't happen, and we knew we had to start commencement of construction of one of the schools because the situation was becoming critical. Ultimately, it was the Martin School that was approved by the town meeting, and it was also made clear that the town was not going to override 2.5, particularly for education, and that we had to do it within the resources available to the town without an override. And therefore, town meeting decided that we would do the Martin School. Initially, the building committee was a study committee. It wasn't a bricks and mortar type of a committee, and we formulated that first plan that failed to be accepted by the voters in an override. It was accepted unanimously, pretty much unanimously by town meeting, but had to go to an override, and we all know that the overrides were unsuccessful. I don't think to a person the school building committee members were chagrined. We knew that we had to propose other alternatives that would be acceptable, and we took on that role.
Well, articles would be submitted to the Finance Committee for recommendations. And we would look at the articles, sit down with the school committee, sit down with those people that were involved in the building committee, because RTM at one point on one of the IP of the articles set up a building committee to study this. And I believe that was back in '92. And that's what they did. And then it went around, and it was a verse between building a new building or rehabbing a lot of the elementary schools that were going on. So when the articles came back into the Finance Committee, especially on the renovation of a lot of the elementary schools, we looked at the funding that was available at that time, and the only funding that was really available was to do the Martin School. And that was, out of all of them, that was the best decision.
Recently, Cable 27 got a chance to get a closer look at the construction of the Martin School addition. Ernie Sandlin, the clerk of the works, gave us a tour of the site and updated us on the improvements the new building will bring to the teachers and students of the Martin School.
Well, the improvements, well, there's multiple improvements. We have an interior that, looking at the old section, some of that will be remodeled. New floor tile, paint in every classroom in the old section will be painted. There'll be a better, more efficient smoke and heat detection system installed. The boiler room, there'll be a completely new boiler room for old and new, so the efficiency, the heat efficiency is going to be there. Again, we have the full-service, full-size gymnasium for the activities in the wintertime. Currently, what they use is what they call a cafetorium, a pot cafeteria during the day, and then pot gymnasium. So we won't have to worry about putting the tables up to have gym class. They'll have a gym class here. We're going to have a green area back here. The kids will have a field during the springtime to use, and during the fall. Basically, what we'll have too is on the interior a lot more bathrooms than what we have now. More efficient running school.
With school still in session in the old building, students got a first-hand look at the construction site. Some members of the 6th grade have been keeping a log of events by meeting with Mr. Sandlin and observing the site themselves. Principal Batista told us how the activity has affected the students and the school year.
I've been very pleased with the process of the construction as it's been going on. The clerk of the works, Ernie Sandlin, has worked very closely with me to coordinate programs and problems as they have arisen. Most of the difficulty was in the early construction during the excavation. Now that we're into the major construction and bricking and the interior work, there is really little, if no, disruption to the educational process at this time. The students have been very excited. Many of the teachers have taken their classes around the area, and hopefully we'll be able to get more classes into the building when it's near completion for a tour. But they've used it as a learning experience whenever they can within their classrooms.
We also asked Ernie Sandlin if he felt the town was getting what it expected when it voted for the new addition.
Yes, I think the town's getting more than what they expected, because now we can start to see it come into life on the improvements. It's probably things we never thought about at town meeting when they voted for this article. Like I just mentioned, fuel efficiency. They'll be saving money down the road there. When you have older buildings, it costs a lot more to repair, maintain, just to keep heated. You're looking at a system here, as you can see the insulation on the walls here. You don't have that in the old buildings, so it's going to stay warmer in the winter, cooler towards the warmer months that the kids are in school, especially with the way Department of Education is talking on extending the school days or extending the school year. So, we got to have a modern building to accommodate for their modern thoughts as far as education.
The decision to put an addition on the Martin Elementary School now set in motion the construction phase of the project. Two keys to keeping the process from becoming too costly were the state's reimbursement plan and the hiring of the right people to oversee the work.
The approval of the Martin project was based on the premise that the town would receive 72% reimbursement from the state through their school building assistance program, which is overseen by the State Department of Education. So once the town meeting allocated the money for the project, the architects had to come up with some pretty well-developed plans to submit to the Department of Education by June 1st of 1994, so they would get on the list as soon as possible, because it takes a 3 years before the town actually starts receiving money. So they got on the state list and were subsequently approved for 72% reimbursement. So that meant the town would get back 72 cents for every dollar they spent on the project, which was very important because the financial planning to pay for the school bond was based on getting that 72% reimbursement. So that, in effect, did happen. Then the school building committee went out to bid. They got quite a few bids back from general contractors, subcontractors, and in the fall of 1994, they awarded bids for the project. And they also hired Ernest Sandlin, a town resident, to be clerk of the works of the project. Mr. Sandlin had at one time worked for the school department. He was in carpentry and construction field. He had served on the Board of Public Works. he was one of 3 finalists, and then subsequently was chosen to be the clerk of the works. They one of the points they made about hiring a local person is that he was a member of the community, and in addition to having the background for the position, that he would have a personal interest in seeing that the project was successful.
After I was hired by the building committee, the first part of the project was, of course, for myself personally, to take the specs home at night and find out what this project was about. After we got that somewhat under control, the contractor started to have his equipment show up on site. His first job was to make sure that the land was cleared and grubbed. Trees were removed by a subcontractor. Those were recycled, as I like to say. The building committee wanted anything and everything that was coming out of there to be recycled. The wood chips brought to the park for the zoo area, probably spread around bushes around town too. A lot of the wood was brought up to the parks for use in their wood stove at the ski lodge. We also brought a load of logs to the Woodcock Garrison. That building, this old school, is used in the old Woodcock Garrison for teaching aids for the children. I think it's 4th and 5th graders go over there. And then I would say half of the logs were transported to Rehoboth to be used for a later date, to be cut up into planks to be used at the park, DPW, or whatever department needs them. There was great pressure put on the contractor from the building committee to keep his schedule, not giving him any opportunity, any window of opportunity to extend the construction schedule. The building committee met at various times to reassure and reaffirm their decision that they want that building to open September of '95. With the closed-in roof, it gave the subcontractors electrical, plumbing, HVAC, you name it, any kind of trade you can imagine, the opportunity to work in some kind of comfort level. And then from that point, I think we kept with the schedule.
Yeah, there was one incident where the foundation was being poured, and they had a process where they had to place an oil residue on the foundation, and it was emitting an odor. So one of the special needs teachers came to me and said that they were getting an odor in their classroom, and we went out and checked it out with the clerk of the works, and what was happening, the odor was being vented in through our air return system, and that was easily remedied just by simply covering the air return system, and that eliminated that problem. So we evacuated that classroom for about an hour and a half until the odors dissipated, and they came right back in and went right along with their instruction. That was one of the major disruptions.
We had to make a lot of provisions for relocating classrooms, keeping in mind that the project was twofold. One was a new addition, and the second part was to renovate a lot of the existing space that had been used as classrooms. So we had to relocate temporarily a number of classrooms. We had to relocate the nurse's office, the principal's office, secretarial spaces. We had to make adjustments for the cafeteria in terms of the lunch program, since we were renovating the kitchen, and for a period of time we weren't able to produce lunches. We had to adjust for the closing down of the gymnasium and the construction of a new gymnasium. Actually, we didn't close a gym. The gym had been the cafeteria in the past. So a lot of those kinds of adjustments had to be made within the building in order to keep operations running smoothly. We also had to make adjustments for health and safety because of the heavy equipment and type of construction that was being done. We had to reroute traffic, both vehicle traffic and pedestrian traffic, so as to stay away from the construction site. A lot of temporary fencing and do's and don'ts in terms of what was permissible, what wasn't, areas that youngsters had to stay away from. We put a high priority on safety throughout the project, and it paid great dividends. We had no injuries. We had no problems of any kind in that area. And, the disruption was there, but everyone saw beyond that and knew what the end product was going to look like, and saw it as a very worthwhile inconvenience for what we were going to gain in the end.
Upon completion of the addition, there were new adjustments with which the town and the school system had to contend. Issues like redistricting and the future of this now rather large elementary school were hot topics discussed between concerned parents and administrators.
With the expansion of the Martin School now to the point that's been done, this facility will accommodate approximately 700 to 725 elementary students. So what it's done is create a great deal more classroom space. However, that classroom space is all in one end of town. So the situation now is that the school administrators must find a way to make best use of those classrooms by moving students from other parts of the town towards that new school. So what they in effect have to do now is come up with redistricting, which means that the existing school district lines, the invisible lines that separate the various elementary school districts must all be reconsidered, because to put 700 students in that school, they will take students basically from other school districts near the Martin School District. That will in turn open up space in those schools, so students from other schools will move into those schools. As the superintendent of schools, Alan Brown, has explained, it'll be a domino effect all through the school system as he moves students towards Martin School. So he will, it'll start at the other end of town, in effect, if you want to look at it that way, and students will subsequently be moved to the next district and the next district until Martin School is filled. What that means is a lot of disruption for a lot of families. It could very well mean that a child who has been in a particular elementary school for 2 or 3 years now must move to a new school. It may mean that parents who are looking forward to their children getting a particular teacher next year might not get that teacher. However, it will also mean a lot of transfers for teachers too. Alan Brown has talked about how he'd like to move blocks of students in the form of 25 students from a particular area with a teacher almost, so that it's almost like, in effect, like moving a whole classroom towards that new school. He has to consider where he will put kindergarten students, how many classes he will have in each school. What he's trying to do is establish some type of stability in each elementary school. He'd like to have the same number of classrooms for every grade. In other words, if he has 4 first grade classrooms in Martin School, he'd like to have 4 second grade classrooms, 4 third grade classrooms, so that students, once they start there, they can pretty much move through the elementary level in the same building. So he's wrestling with that. He's also wrestling with the transportation issues of moving students to another district. There's a concern of splitting neighborhoods, which always happens with school districts. Kids might not go to the same school as their friends. So there's an awful lot of issues that are going to come up. Building all these new classrooms is going to be great for the system as a whole. However, the individual impacts are still going to be felt.
Redistricting is something that we knew as a school system we were going to have to do with the Martin addition coming online. When you open 11 new rooms in one school in one part of town and you're overcrowded in all of your schools, you need to step back and redistribute the students, if you will, so as to take full advantage of those new rooms. So it was something that we knew we were going to face, and we're in the midst of it right now. I have proposed a redistricting plan to the school committee. We will have a public hearing on that plan this coming Monday night to provide parents with an opportunity to share their thoughts, concerns, reactions. We're looking forward to that. We want to hear from parents as to what their views are on it. I do expect that the school committee will vote on a final plan at their March school committee meeting. The plan that I've proposed meets the need of redistributing students, and it meets the guidelines that we were trying to adhere to, namely keeping youngsters from the same family together to the fullest extent possible, not having brothers and sisters attending 2 different elementary schools. We want to have youngsters attending as close as possible to the school that's in their neighborhood. We're trying to give youngsters an opportunity that if they start in one school, say in second grade, that they have reasonable assurance that they might be able to remain in that school for their elementary years. Now, those were our guiding principles when we approached redistricting. We haven't been able to achieve that in every instance. I guess we realized we wouldn't be able to have 100% success in that. But we've done about 95% of that, I think, effectively. And what we're doing right now is going back into the plan that I've proposed and making some hand changes. Most of the plan was developed with the help of computers, but we're back now doing some hand changes. I have about 60 letters from parents that have asked that I reconsider the placement for their children for next year. And in some instances, we're going to be able to do that. If they live particularly close to one school and we have some extra room in that school, we'll try to accommodate those requests and certainly meet the needs of the parents. We have some youngsters with medical needs that, because of those needs, have to attend a particular school, or a school that doesn't have steps, for instance, or something handicap accessible. And of course, the computer doesn't sort that. It just sorts according to residence. So we're going to go back in and make some changes for meeting the medical and physical needs of some of our students. We have other requests that have come in that they want to attend a particular school because the parents went to that school and there's kind of a family tradition involved. We take all of those very seriously, and I will go back and respond personally to every one of those parents who has sent me a letter. And if we're able to accommodate the request, we will. If we're not, then I'll tell them why we weren't able to do that and hope for their understanding on that. I think that we need to keep the redistricting in perspective right now. It's had a lot of media coverage, but when you consider that we're talking approximately 2,400 students being part of this plan, and I've had 60 parents send me letters saying they'd like to have something reconsidered, that's a little less than 3% of the parents of elementary children. And another way of looking at it is that 97% haven't sent me a letter and seem to realize that this plan had to be, and they're either satisfied or at least understanding of how their placements came. It's a major undertaking. I mean, when you redistrict 2,400 students, you're talking a major plan. And once we get the plan finalized, get the placements finalized, that's just the beginning. We then have to redo all of our bus routes to accommodate the new placements. We then have to restaff our schools because we'll be adding sections in one building, reducing in another. There are a lot of spin-offs, and it'll take us well into the spring to really finalize all of it. But I'm pleased with the plan. I think the plan is a viable one. I think it's going to be a significant improvement over what we've had. And I think most parents will come to see it as a plan that makes a lot of sense and is good for education.
I am one of those where my daughter will end up in 4 different schools in 4 years. The other complaint I kind of have is I have a 4th grader next year, I have a 3rd grader next year, I will have a kindergartner next year. You've split the neighborhood into 2 different schools that also have 2 different start times. Besides the fact that I don't want my daughter in a new school every year, you've got her at School Street starting at 8:30 and my 4th grader at Martin starting at 9. With a kindergartner, I could be at the bus stop every 2 hours next year. Historically, that neighborhood used to be School Street, and then we went on to Ambet. Same start times, same bus routes. I would put all 3 kids on the same bus. I would have to put all 3 kids on a different bus each day next year. You redistricted most of our neighborhood, Reed Ave, Smith Street, to Roosevelt 2 years ago. I presently have 2 children back to back going to the same school, getting on the same bus at the same time. I think this neighborhood, this plan hurts tremendously. Besides splitting families, different buses, different start times and release times.
My concern is, let them stay in Ambet, let them go to Martin, but let them stay together. And we're also in the same situation in that neighborhood where we're a district, pick a year, pick a school. So we're looking for some continuity. We seem to be that area stuck in the middle, pulled in every which way, every different direction. So we're looking for, give the kids some stability and keep the families together.
And finally, my last question is, once the plan is voted on and approved, what assurances do we have as parents that you will go back, revisit these issues, and satisfy them to our expectations?
Well, satisfy them to everyone's expectations. I'm not sure that I can give you that
We have
assurance.
some real
obviously.
conflicts out there that need to be addressed.
We certainly do.
And I just want an assurance from you that you're going to address these issues.
I think if
For those
you,
of us in the room tonight that have taken the time to come down here and express those issues to you, for concern.
yes, I think if you know me,
Okay.
go ahead.
Mr. Brown has said that he will, and I'm sure it'll be the direction of this school committee to address those issues. As he said, you know, the computer
Excuse
sorts things.
Excuse me.
I'm speaking, thank you.
Yes, I
The
know, you have a
computers-
tendency to speak up.
Sir,
I'm asking
let's
him the
not
question.
be
I'm
rude.
asking him the question.
And I have said that I will answer it.
I don't want you to answer it, I would like.
Well,
you
sir,
to.
then you're out of order. Please sit down and let
Is
someone
that-
else speak.
Is that the same way you're going to treat this whole issue?
No, sir, we have addressed this issue, and you are being rude.
Mr.
The school-
Brown,
you
Mr. Brown,
asked-
Thank you for your time. As for you,
You
Mr.
asked
Daley,
how this would be
If I
addressed.
have the opportunity to vote you out of office, I will. Good night.
My biggest concern is the reason that we built the house there was because I put my son through 6 years at the Falls School. And my daughter's going to be entering the 3rd grade in September. I've supported the school for 6 years, and we've become a good community. And we have other children in the neighborhood that we all walk to school with. And to take my daughter and bus her across town is absurd. To spend the money on a new bus route when you're going to continuously bus children into the Falls School that live on the outskirts of the Falls. And my biggest concern is I just spent a lot of money on a brand new home to keep my daughter in a school that I support.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dave Manoogian. I'm Vice Chairman of the Martin School Building Committee, and it is my privilege and honor to serve as your Master of Ceremonies here today for the rededication of the Joseph W. Martin School. This addition is a symbol of all that is good in the town of North Attleborough and demonstrates what true teamwork can produce. Although many espoused different opinions during the process of deliberation, once a decision was made, the town was able to pull together all of its resources and spirit to ensure a successful project. Let this spirit continue as the town embarks on the middle school construction project and the planning and construction of a new police station.
The entire process of building an addition to a school can be a very difficult one. Many details have to be considered and agreed upon because there is much more involved than merely the physical structure. The people involved in these decisions knew that different opinions can make or break a project. This group of people took great pride in their working relationship and in the fact that the Martin Elementary School addition was completed on time.
The main thrust of my position, not only overviewing the construction that was happening on the site and keeping the architect informed of what was happening along with the building committee, I was the go-between for the contractor. Again, I touched base with every department in town, and every one of them wanted this addition to succeed for the townspeople and the kids in town here. Take, for instance, the building inspection department. In the building inspection department, we have of course, the number one person, the building inspector. His inspectors working for him is the electrical, plumbing, and HVAC. Those people were there constantly, making sure that the trades that were there and their expertise was being done correctly. I can inform them when I had suspicions of things being done, not the way we'd want them done, but they were there to make sure they were done. And the town owes those people a great deal of gratitude. There were some areas, just like your shopping list, when you go to Stop and Shop or Shores, you always forget something. And this project's not unlike your shopping list. There were some things that were forgotten. And without the cooperation of DPW, you know, the guys there came over and helped us out in various areas that saved the school building committee some money. Same thing with the electric light. The electric light had contributed many man hours and supplies, you know, to this project, which made it successful. Okay, in order for this project to be, one, completed on time, two, under budget or on budget, we needed the cooperation of virtually every department in town. Not one department failed us. They all wanted it to succeed for the school children and for the taxpayers in North Attleborough. And the building committee, the school children, and the townspeople owe a great deal of gratitude to all those departments I mentioned. And myself, I personally thank them for their cooperation.
I think the Finance Committee's only role was to make sure that a plan was in place, the funding was in place to maintain it. And then, you know, it was up to the building committee and the school committee and everybody else involved to make sure it got built, and it did. Looks wonderful. I think everybody did an excellent job on it. It was a tough battle for everybody. You know, it was not easy putting the whole thing together, especially going through the financial crisis that we had gone through. But I'm glad to see that it's over. We've got some breathing room. We did get to the light at the end of the tunnel.
Well, I think the part of the strength of this building committee is the varied backgrounds we bring to it. And I think that was very apparent during the construction phase of the Martin addition, because inevitably construction problems come up. There are change orders. You're struggling to work within your budget. But I think we had an excellent clerk of the works in Ernie Sandland. He did an admirable job. He kept us all on top of things. We were able to meet as frequently as possible and as necessary to address problems. And basically in the public construction business, whatever the contractor feels they can get away with, they'll do it. You have to really watch your architect. Even though your architect is working with you, there's a great tendency to say, well, let's get along and just get this thing moving. But we're charged with counting the pennies of the town and making sure the building's built in accordance with the contract. And if you're not, I guess, eternally vigilant, you're going to get taken to the cleaners. And I think the mindset of this group of people that were formed this Martin Building Committee is they weren't going to take us to the cleaners. I think everyone to a person felt that if we were getting taken, it was money out of our own pockets, literally. And we acted that way, and I think we had a darn good result. Worked out well.
I just think that this project coming in on time was just a credit to the building committee, to the school committee, to the clerk of the work, to the Martin School staff, because very few construction projects, to my knowledge, particularly at school construction, come in on time. And that was my great fear, that we would not be able to start on time. And I just think it's a credit to everybody involved that they worked very hard together, went over and above the call of duty to see that this project was finished on time.
We didn't have the political support from the political leadership in the community, and you really need that behind you as a superintendent. And I'm not putting all the fault out on the political leadership. I'm saying I didn't do a great job selling it either. So there's frustration with them, frustration with myself in terms of getting it through, and particularly frustrating when I felt it was very clear as to where the population was going, what the educational issues were, what really was the best thing financially for the town, but couldn't get that across to the folks who had to be convinced. And you know, we got a piece of it in the end, the Martin School. But you know, that was a satisfying, I think, response or solution. Eventually, the middle school is coming through, and it wasn't the best solution. And I always like to have the best, so it's frustrating. But c'est la vie.
I think one of the things that perhaps got lost in the Martin project that people didn't pay enough attention to was the tremendous sacrifice, the tremendous adjustments that had to be made by a lot of people in the day-to-day operations of keeping the school running, keeping the school moving smoothly amidst a major construction project. So everyone from the bus drivers to the crossing guards to Principal Batista and his staff, certainly the custodial staff had a yeoman challenge of trying to work around dust and you name it, boards on the floor and walls being there one day and down the next. Everyone had a can-do optimism about this project, and I heard virtually no complaints. It was something where everyone understood that there would be inconveniences, there would be needs to stay flexible and adjust, and everybody approached it in that frame of mind. And I think that's all a credit to the people that we have that were involved, not just the school committee, not just the principal and the building committee, but all of the day-to-day people who had to work around things and did it without complaint, assisted where they could. Even the contractor was helpful to us. They created learning experiences for our students and let our students visit the site and see what they were doing in terms of mortar and boards and electrical work. So the construction itself became a learning activity, hands-on for our students, and it was quite magical to watch how everyone worked and all the parts came together and formed a whole. And I think there's a credit due there to all of the people involved in this and the understanding, the patience, and the commitment that they made to the success of this project.
What happened really was a mix of opinions that came out of this whole override issue. When I did exit polling after the 2 elections, I got varied reactions from people. I interviewed older people who said they supported the override. They'd be willing to pay the taxes. I interviewed young people who had their children with them going to the polls who voted no because they said they felt that the town should find a way to do it without forcing young families to pay higher taxes. And some people argued, well, the tax increase wouldn't be that great and you should be willing to do it. But for a family who was barely able to pay their mortgage, another $100 a year or whatever it would have been in the form of higher taxes was very difficult for them to face. But there were a mix of views. I had young people who told me they had been through the school system and thought very highly of the school system, but still voted against the override. There's also always, when there's an override vote, there's always the attitude that, well, if you vote against the school override, you're against education. And that really polarizes people, I think, when that argument is made, because the issue is a separate one. It's not a vote against education, it's a vote against higher taxes. So you can't assume that a person who says no to an override is saying no to the schools. Or else I heard the argument, well, if you don't support this, you don't really care about education, you don't care about the kids, and that isn't true, of course. People just were very concerned about their financial stability. So you have to look at that when you kind of analyze why voters vote the way they do. But the voters were in effect saying town officials find a way, and a few months after the override, the town officials were saying, well, maybe we can do one project without an override. And then a year later, they were saying, well, we can not only do one project, we can build a $20 million middle school without an override. So I guess the voters were pretty sharp because they said find a way, and the town ended up finding a way, and they're doing both. So